The next morning at 8 o'clock, the police sergeant called and told him he could come pick Johnson up. "We booked a nigger on that charge," he said. "Your boy didn't have nothing to do with it." Shepard was at the station in 10 minutes, his face hot with shame. Johnson sat slouched on a bench in a drab outer office, reading a police magazine. There was no one else in the room. Shepard sat down beside him and put his hand tentatively on his shoulder. The boy glanced up, his lip curled, and back to the magazine. Shepard felt physically sick. The ugliness of what he had done bore in upon him with a sudden, dull intensity. He had failed him at just the point where he might have turned him, once and for all, in the right direction. "Rufus," he said, "I apologize. I was wrong, and you were right. I misjudged you." The boy continued to read. "I'm sorry." The boy wet his finger and turned a page. Shepard braced himself. "I was a fool, Rufus," he said. Johnson's mouth slid slightly to the side. He shrugged without raising his head from the magazine. "Will you forget it this time?" Shepard said. "It won't happen again." The boy looked up. His eyes were bright and unfriendly. "I'll forget it," he said, "but you better remember it." He got up and stalked toward the door. In the middle of the room he turned and jerked his arm at Shepard, and Shepard jumped up and followed him, as if the boy had yanked an invisible leash. "Your shoe," he said eagerly. "Today is the day to get your shoe." Thank God for the shoe. But when they went to the brace shop, they found that the shoe had been made 2 sizes too small, and a new one would not be ready for another 10 days. Johnson's temper improved at once. The clerk had obviously made a mistake in the measurements, but the boy insisted the foot had grown. He left the shop with a pleased expression, as if, in expanding, the foot had acted on some inspiration of its own. Shepard's face was haggard. After this he redoubled his efforts. Since Johnson had lost interest in the telescope, he bought a microscope and a box of prepared slides. If he couldn't impress the boy with immensity, he would try the infinitesimal. For 2 nights, Johnson appeared absorbed in the new instrument. Then he abruptly lost interest in it. But he seemed content to sit in the living room in the evening and read the encyclopedia. He devoured the encyclopedia as he devoured his dinner, steadily and without dint to his appetite. Each subject appeared to enter his head, be ravaged, and thrown out. Nothing pleased Shepard more than to see the boy slouched on the sofa, his mouth shut, reading. After they had spent 2 or 3 evenings like this, he began to recover his vision. His confidence returned. He knew that some day he would be proud of Johnson. On Thursday night, Shepard attended a city council meeting. He dropped the boys off at a movie on his way and picked them up on his way back. When they reached home, an automobile with a single red eye above its windshield was waiting in front of the house. Shepard's lights, as he turned into the driveway, illuminated 2 dour faces in the car. "The cops," Johnson said. "Some nigger has broke in somewhere, and they've come for me again." "We'll see about that," Shepard muttered. He stopped the car in the driveway and switched off the lights. "You boys go in the house and go to bed," he said. "I'll handle this." He got out and strode toward the squad car. He thrust his head in the window. The 2 policemen were looking at him with silent, knowledgeable faces. "A house on the corner of Shelton and Mills," the one in the driver's seat said. "It looks like a train run through it." "He was in the picture show downtown," Shepard said. "My boy was with him. He had nothing to do with the other one, and he had nothing to do with this one. I'll be responsible." "If I was you," the one nearest him said, "I wouldn't be responsible for any little bastard like him." "I said I'd be responsible," Shepard repeated coldly. "You people made a mistake last time. Don't make another." The policemen looked at each other. "It ain't our funeral," the one in the driver's seat said, and turned the key in the ignition. Shepard went in the house and sat down in the living room in the dark. He did not suspect Johnson, and he did not want the boy to think he did. If Johnson thought he suspected him again, he would lose everything. But he wanted to know if his alibi was airtight. He thought of going to Norton's room and asking him if Johnson had left the movie. But that would be worse. Johnson would know what he was doing and would be incensed. He decided to ask Johnson himself. He would be direct. He went over in his mind what he was going to say, and then he got up and went to the boy's door. It was open as if he had been expected, but Johnson was in bed. Just enough light came in from the hall for Shepard to see his shape under the sheet. He came in and stood at the foot of the bed. "They've gone," he said. "I told them you had nothing to do with it, and that I'd be responsible." There was a muttered "eh" from the pillow. Shepard hesitated. "Rufus," he said, "you didn't leave the movie for anything at all, did you?" "You make out like you got all this confidence in me," a sudden outraged voice cried, "and you ain't got any. You don't trust me no more now than you did then." The voice, disembodied, seemed to come more surely from the depths of Johnson than when his face was visible. It was a cry of reproach, edged slightly with contempt. "I do have confidence in you," Shepard said intensely. "I have every confidence in you. I believe in you, and I trust you completely." "You got your eye on me all the time," the voice said sullenly. "When you get through asking me a bunch of questions, you're going across the hall and ask Norton a bunch of them." "I have no intention of asking Norton anything, and never did," Shepard said gently, "and I don't suspect you at all. You could hardly have got from the picture show downtown out here to break in a house and back to the picture show in the time you had." "That's why you believe me," the boy cried, "because you think I couldn't have done it." "No, no," Shepard said. "I believe you because I believe you've got the brains and the guts not to get in trouble again. I believe you know yourself well enough now to know that you don't have to do such things. I believe that you can make anything of yourself that you set your mind to." Johnson sat up. A faint light shone on his forehead, but the rest of his face was invisible. "And I could have broke in there if I'd wanted to in the time I had," he said. "But I know you didn't," Shepard said. "There's not the least trace of doubt in my mind." There was a silence. Johnson lay back down. Then the voice, low and hoarse, as if it were being forced out with difficulty, said, "You don't want to steal and smash up things when you've got everything you want already." Shepard caught his breath. The boy was thanking him. He was thanking him. There was gratitude in his voice. There was appreciation. He stood there, smiling foolishly in the dark, trying to hold the moment in suspension. Involuntarily, he took a step toward the pillow and stretched out his hand and touched Johnson's forehead. It was cold and dry, like rusty iron. "I understand. Good night, son," he said, and turned quickly and left the room. He closed the door behind him and stood there, overcome with emotion. Across the hall, Norton's door was open. The child lay on the bed, on his side, looking into the light from the hall. After this, the road with Johnson would be smooth. Norton sat up and beckoned to him. He saw the child, but after the first instant, he did not let his eye focus directly on him. He could not go in and talk to Norton without breaking Johnson's trust. He hesitated, but remained where he was a moment as if he saw nothing. Tomorrow was the day they were to go back for the shoe. It would be a climax to the good feeling between them. He turned quickly and went back into his own room. The child sat for some time, looking at the spot where his father had stood. Finally his gaze became aimless, and he lay back down. The next day, Johnson was glum and silent, as if he were ashamed that he had revealed himself. His eyes had a hooded look. He seemed to have retired within himself, and there to be going through some crisis of determination. Shepherd could not get to the brace shop quickly enough. He left Norton at home because he did not want his attention divided. He wanted to be free to observe Johnson's reaction minutely. The boy did not seem pleased or even interested in the prospect of the shoe, but when it became an actuality, certainly then he would be moved. The brace shop was a small concrete warehouse, lined and stacked with the equipment of affliction. Wheelchairs and walkers covered most of the floor. The walls were hung with every kind of crutch and brace. Artificial limbs were stacked on the shelves, legs and arms and hands, claws and hooks, straps and human harnesses, and unidentifiable instruments for unnamed deformities. In a small clearing in the middle of the room, there was a row of yellow plastic-cushioned chairs and a shoe-fitting stool. Johnson slouched down in one of the chairs and set his foot up on the stool and sat with his eyes on it moodily. What was roughly the toe had broken open again, and he had patched it with a piece of canvas. Another place he had patched with what appeared to be the tongue of the original shoe. The two sides were laced with twine. There was an excited flush on Shepherd's face. His heart was beating unnaturally fast. The clerk appeared from the back of the shop with the new shoe under his arm. "Got it right this time," he said. He straddled the shoe-fitting stool and held the shoe up, smiling as if he had produced it by magic. It was a black, slick, shapeless object, shining hideously. It looked like a blunt weapon, highly polished. Johnson gazed at it darkly. "With this shoe," the clerk said, "you won't know you're walking. You'll think you're riding." He bent his bright pink bald head and began gingerly to unlace the twine. He removed the old shoe as if he were skinning an animal still half alive. His expression was strained. The unsheathed mass of foot in the dirty sock made Shepherd feel queasy. He turned his eyes away until the new shoe was on. The clerk laced it up rapidly. "Now stand and walk around," he said, "and see if that ain't power glide." He winked at Shepherd. "In that shoe," he said, "he won't know he don't have a normal foot." Shepherd's face was bright with pleasure. Johnson stood up and walked a few yards away. He walked stiffly, with almost no dip in his short side. He stood for a moment, rigid, with his back to them. "Wonderful," Shepherd said. "Wonderful." It was as if he had given the boy a new spine. Johnson turned around. His mouth was set in a thin, icy line. He came back to the seat and removed the shoe. He put his foot in the old one and began lacing it up. "You want to take it home and see if it suits you first," the clerk murmured. "No," Johnson said. "I ain't gonna wear it at all." "What's wrong with it?" Shepherd said, his voice rising. "I don't need no new shoe," Johnson said, "and when I do, I got ways of getting my own." His face was stony, but there was a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Boy," the clerk said, "is your trouble in your foot or in your head?" "Go soak your skull," Johnson said. "Your brains are on fire." The clerk rose glumly, but with dignity, and asked Shepherd what he wanted done with the shoe, which he dangled dispiritedly by the lace. Shepherd's face was a dark, angry red. He was staring straight in front of him at a leather corset with an artificial arm attached. The clerk asked him again. "Wrap it up," Shepherd muttered. He turned his eyes to Johnson. "He's not mature enough for it yet," he said. "I had thought he was less of a child." The boy leered. "You been wrong before," he said.